And it's showtime, folks. Welcome back to Joe and Joe with Cup of Joe tonight. How you doing tonight, Joe?
Doing pretty well. It's been a heavy week, pretty consistently busy. Um, been doing good though. Nothing to complain about on my end. Nothing really new either though, to be honest with you. Just been out there meeting people, shaking hands, and everything of that nature. Seeing how
All
that
right.
goes.
Get out there, kiss hands, shake babies, do all of that infamous stuff. Uh, yeah, no shaking babies. No babies were injured during the making of the show.
That
Uh,
is correct.
um, so, yeah, my week also, answering calls, getting people's sites to back up and working, and, realizing that some things have been slacking at work. Go figure. For those of you who don't know, I got an invitation to appear on the Armstrong Williams show, and he televised nationally. I got a little about a 5-minute tidbit towards the end after he got done talking to Darius Baxter about some of the nonprofit stuff he's doing. So if you're on the lookout for something like that, it's out there now. Other than
What is
that,
what is
what?
the Armstrong Williams?
Okay, Armstrong Williams is a conservative host based out of Virginia. He is a Sinclair syndicated television host and works with ABC. So he does an awful lot of conservative based talk shows on that mix between faith, morality, and governance, which is one of those things that we may or may not talk about a little bit later on this evening. But he brings in high morality people, inspirational speakers on a regular basis to talk about the roles that they have. Like today, I caught the bit with Darius Baxter in his role in assisting with improving lives and qualities through the recreation centers in Washington, D.C. Yeah, it was
That's cool.
good. Um, Great conversation. Wish I'd been a little bit better prepared for it. But it is what it is, and it is out there now. So if you're interested, look that up later on, folks. Um, yeah, that was my big thing this week.
That's huge.
Um,
I'd be interested to watch it for sure. I know that. So I'll have to do some digging and find it out.
yeah, if you find it, let me know because I'm not sure where it ended up. As part of his live show earlier this morning. So with that, you and I do have some things to talk about tonight. It is the town hall. Those of you who are watching, please feel free to chip in, ask questions. We got the screen up and running so we can see your questions and respond to those in near real time. So if you got an issue you want to talk to us about, that said, if any of the other candidates are out there, they want to pitch in, drop a note. I'll send you the link. We'll get you in here, man. So tonight, what role should the federal government have, if any, in local zoning decisions?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is one of those. I don't think the federal government should, and like we've talked about a little bit previously, state local control is as low as levels we can for control in all of these aspects. Um, People at Washington D.C. and the Hill don't necessarily know what Joe down the road needs to put on his zoning and what the city council wants to be working for in their growth and how to best drive their community forward. So I think it should be city county control as local as it can.
Well, and one of the other bad things that the federal government has a tendency to get involved in is subsidizing bad city policy. There's actually a number of cities across the United States that have continued to conduct themselves poorly simply because the federal government has decided to subsidize the area. Boise's one of those that hasn't really had that effect, but we have multiple economic zones that affect the Boise area, certain areas that are designated, ironically, as a Superfund. We got a Superfund site in Boise. Not too many people are aware of that. In addition to that, there's areas that are impacted around it that are considered economic opportunity zones. All of these areas represent opportunities for individuals to come in and invest money and try and spruce the area up. Big question is the economic opportunity worth the opportunity? And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But again, that's the federal government getting involved in city management.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing too, is like you don't know from high level federal government what is going to really hammer home or what people will want in their communities at the city and county level either.
Right. So the Boise example, one of the key ones is we have the tank farm, over on Orchard across from St. Alphonsus Hospital, just off of the freeway. And it's an interesting discussion. Reason why is because they've considered moving it out of the area simply because the tankers, it's a single lane road, constricted traffic. We've been doing the tank farm there for a while, and the area around Orchard has grown close to the road. So there's no room to expand it. Even if you were to take the opportunity of eminent domain, seize the area adjacent to it, you already have shops that are built up right to the edge of the street in some places. Mm-hmm. So the opportunity without actually going through and clearing out a significant number of buildings is extremely limited. But, the city keeps trying to say, okay, well, we want to buy it, we want to convert it into something else. Problem is it is a Superfund site. Reason why is because it's been leaking oil for 80 some years now. The ground, the soil, it's saturated. The depth to which they'd have to dig in order to clean it up, in order to make it livable. Again, we're talking Superfund site, a significant amount of money. And right now they've simply decided that, well, we won't move people in there, so we won't have to worry about them being poisoned from it in such a case. Unfortunately, everybody who's already living there, tough luck.
Right. not the best. Not the best.
Yeah. So again, there are roles. Like I said, Superfund site, EPA, that has a role in cleaning up areas that have become effectively disaster areas. You talk Flint, Michigan, with regards to the plumbing, this still hasn't been fixed. 20 years later, they still, or 15, however long, they still got brown water running through the pipes. So, yeah, I think there's a role for it, but we need to be careful what that role is. Fun one, Joe. How do you balance growth with preserving Idaho's rural character?
Yeah, this is one of those questions that really, it's difficult. Because you don't have to balance it so much, but you do need to be smart about how you grow. And like we were talking a little bit, keeping these decisions local, like you're mentioning eminent domain, everything in that nature, making sure that we're doing it as wisely as we can and not pushing people out of their homes or pushing people out of their places that they live. And cutting those bureaucratic red tapes that really prevent meaningful growth. And we should be growing where there's already infrastructure next to rural communities that are already have everything in place. That way we're not trying to reinvent the wheel or create something massive. It's not a one size fits all rule. But we do need to control that growth, and I think using existing infrastructure will help with that. not, protecting people's property already there. We can grow. We have room to grow. It's just doing it wisely, in my opinion.
Yeah, so spent a bit of time sitting in Boise City Hall, listening to the zoning that was particularly big this last session, with Boise City Hall and the mayor's election and everything that went into that, especially when they were going in and reviewing the city planning, the city zoning, and arrangements being made along those lines. And there is a lot that goes into that. And some of it you're able to plan for, and some of it, unfortunately, the city actually plans backwards for. Not as in backwards planning, as in just backwards about it. Some of these is like when you go in and you build up infrastructure, when you build housing in an area and you try and figure out whether or not the infrastructure is actually going to support it. You're talking about sewer, you're talking about power, you're talking about water. And each one of these has to be planned out in such a way so that you're not cutting it off to other areas while you're growing and building in certain others. So you end up with, a huge 500-person apartment complex sitting in an area that previously held, some 5 families. And now the need for water, sewer, and power has completely changed. You're looking at bigger transformers. You're looking at larger pipes for the sewer. You're looking at more water that's coming in. And even when we take a look at the development of rural communities, we run into the same problem. Reason why is because the aquifers are not inexhaustible. You can only move so many people into an area before you run into a problem with water shortage, simply because of the amount of water people use. So it's like, it is one of the reasons why prime farmland is so key for development, because it already has the water that people need. Unfortunately, it pushes agriculture further out to where there isn't water.
Right.
So we keep running into those issues with how do we build up? How do we build where agriculture is independent upon systems? And this comes back to the data centers, especially when we look at moving data centers into communities, especially rural communities, where now all of a sudden your data center and your farms and your livestock are all competing for the same water, competing for the same power, competing for the same land in many cases. So it's like you need to put a cap on certain kinds of growth and understand that there has to be a sustainable level. Now, I'm not talking some, 500 million like the Georgia Stones, said that we needed to, because, nobody, that ain't happening.
What's the Georgia Stones?
Oh, you remember the Georgia Guidestones?
Oh, they took those down. They took those down, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, somebody blew it up, and then they had to remove it because it was a safety hazard. Yeah. But they took that down after, somebody went through the trouble of erecting them and saying, we need to reduce the global population down to 500 million, in order to make it sustainable. And they wrote it in 8 different languages. And gotta love them.
Yeah, that is a crazy. That's I don't know who does this, and nobody knew. Nobody took ownership of it, and they're just like, boom, Georgia Guidestones, and on some random in the middle of like rural nowhere in Georgia. It looked like I looked at it from like the maps and stuff. It looked like it was in the middle of nowhere. Just absolutely insane. Fun story though, but.
Right. Fun story. But yeah, so keeping rural character while allowing growth.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, one of the big problems we have these days is we put so much red tape in place that builders, contractors see no interest in actually building, the kind of homes we grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
Your little 1,500 square foot ranch, single or maybe a split level.
I
We
grew up
don't
in a
see.
trailer.
Okay. Uh,
So it was
yeah.
maybe like 900 square feet.
But it's like the homes that, our parents we grew up in, that our grandparents built, greatest generation came back from the war. They built homes, and they just built. Uh, there wasn't a lot of red tape. They needed a home. They threw up the walls. They ran the wiring. They made it happen. These days, you got to go through a contractor. You got to get a permit. The permits run so expensive that they don't build cheap houses anymore because of the cost associated with. Okay, I shouldn't say cheap houses. They don't build basic houses. They don't build starter homes.
Right.
In order for them to make their profit, they literally got to go straight to McMansion level.
Yeah.
So it's, we got to cut the red tape so that we can actually get back to where we're building basic single family starter homes, on half or third acre, or we're setting up some other sort of arrangement. We need to get the permitting process either completely out of the way or down to where it's actually affordable. Because that permitting process is a tax on the property before you even buy it.
Right. And yeah, exactly. And a lot of times it doesn't even help with um growing it doesn't even help with the quality of work that's been done, because there are so many times that I've seen these subdivisions and these these matchbox homes, that these McMansions that they build up. It's just terrible quality, not going to last for as long as they need it to last, as people just need it to last. But yeah, I think that delves right into that issue of using the cheapest labor for people to live in. And
So the Constitutional Party candidate from Congressional District 2, little houses, little tiny homes, being an option. How you doing, Sierra? Um, that is one of the options, and we've seen that. This is an option that goes beyond the uh, accessory dwelling unit or additional dwelling, whatever ADU stands for. Um, but the idea of a portable home, tiny home, that can be set up, that's of a slightly different standard than an RV. It's designed to be more permanent in place and integrate with local plumbing. And we've also seen tiny home parks, especially down in Utah. Salt Lake City has set up one for homeless veteran community, where they can actually set up. They have a door that locks, a bed they can sleep in, some basic kitchen functions. So tiny homes, little homes, ADUs, they're being brought in, and all of these are things that can be done with personal property. Whereas some cities have zoning laws that say, hey, you can't live out of an RV on your property. And it's like, no, my kid can't. They want to live in the RV in the driveway. Yeah, my kid's going to live there until, we got enough money set aside in order to make things happen. Yeah.
And this comes back to like a mentality of Americans now too, especially because it wasn't very long ago that you had your entire family in the house.
Oh yeah.
From the grandma to the baby. And I think that is part of the issue that we're running into here in America now, is that everybody's getting kicked out when they're 18 and getting told to buy their own, build their own, everything like that. And that's part of the rugged individualism, as I like to call it.
It kind of oversold that rugged individualism. The idea that at 18 you're capable of being an autonomous unit, being able to move anywhere in the United States, get a job anywhere, doing something, and you're automatically independent. And we've come to understand, in the last 30 years now, that golden age is gone. You no longer have that ability to really address, to step up and say those things. When we grew up, one of the shows that we watched was the Walton family. Walton Mountain, they had 4 generations living in that house.
Yeah.
Grandpa Walton, Mom, Pa Walton, John Boy. And, John Boy himself ended up at some point with, family living in there as well. So this whole rugged individualism, the idea of the nuclear family that can just pick up and move and go anywhere and be automatically successful, that sort of went away a long time ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Many voters feel the government isn't always transparent. Trust and accountability.
Yeah, and that's one of those things like I'm very hard up on in regards to we need to speak plainly. We need to use plain language to speak. Honest communication. If I'm mistaken or wrong, we need to be able to say that with plain language. A lot of times I feel like in government they bury a lot of stuff so deep into the background. It's exhausting just to get the information you want, and that's part of the opaqueness in building a system that is designed to make you give up. So bringing those opaque things to the front, I think, would really help with trust and transparency. And then protecting whistleblowers as well is another thing that I think we should do more so at the federal government level. We need to have these. We need to let them be able to. We need to be able to let these people come out and feel safe about coming out and being transparent in what they do. And then with FISA, I think FISA, I forget what it stands for.
The FISA. Foreign
FISA.
Intelligence Surveillance Act.
Yes.
The FISA court.
I am watching that pretty closely right now. I'm hoping that our representation will, vote no to government spying on our individuals. We'll see how the vote comes out, but yeah.
We already know how the vote's going to come out, Joe. I mean, the FISA courts came out some 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And ever since we opened it up to the National Defense Authorization Act and Department of Homeland Security, when we passed the Patriot Act, the whole intent of the FISA court was to authorize U.S. surveillance capability against U.S. citizens. Now, initially it was abroad. It's like, we have a U.S. citizen that's been involved in, espionage in Germany or in Iran or someplace. And, are we actually going to take this surveillance, run it through the court, get a warrant, through this secret court in order to use state's evidence against this individual who is involved in a global act of terrorism? And it's literally turned into the point right now where the FBI walks into the NSA and says, hey, what have you got on Joe?
Low threat.
Yeah, low threat. What have you got on Joe that we can use in order to set him up to take, he may be low threat, but we don't like what he's saying. So what have you got that we can put him away for a couple of years, sort of teach him, his lesson and not get involved in things he's not supposed to be involved in? But the FISA court, the FISA ruling, the National Defense Authorization Act, Patriot Act, this goes back a long time. So for them to vote against it at this point would actually be voting against something that's been institutionalized for, some 30, 40 years. So it's like, I don't see the current crop of institutional congressmen and senators voting no on spying against on spying on U.S. citizens. I wish, I know how I'd vote. I'd vote against it.
Same.
But we're looking at a situation where the institutional congressmen, institutional senators, are looking at this going, well, we've always had it, and I don't feel safe letting it go away. So this is something we're going to have to deal with for a while, and that comes back to the whistleblower issue as well. One of the big things under the Obama era was, rules about protecting whistleblowers. And it's like whistleblowers came forward and off to prison.
Yeah.
Or something. And it's like, what happened to whistleblower protections?
Right.
How are we being transparent if the people who know the dirt can't tell the dirt?
Right. Exactly. And yeah, no, how are we supposed to actually make institutional changes if every time we try to push for like protecting whistleblowers and getting that transparency out there, they just whisk them off to some foreign or a prison or foreign country.
He's an American whistleblower. Hey, we got a CIA black box site in Venezuela.
Yeah.
Let's disappear him to Venezuela for, a year and, find out what else he needs to forget. Given a choice between that and, one of the more infamous Clinton episodes, being a friend of the Clintons is a dangerous occupation.
So I've heard and so I've seen.
But yeah, so transparency, we need to. Come on, Sierra, you can text as many texts as you want. It's a free world. You can say what you want to say. And I know you got a lot to say, my man. I know you got a lot to say. But you're over in Pocatello, so it won't even be Joe who you're running against, here in August or in November. Yeah. Yeah, we'll go ahead and put you up on the screen here for a little bit, Sierra. The Lorax Sierra Law, he's currently running as a constitutionalist. He's run as a libertarian. He's very green. One of these days, maybe we'll bring you on and talk about downwinder syndrome, especially with the recent rulings on Blaine County. Sierra Law is one of the experts on nuclear waste, nuclear radiation, and cancer-induced, especially from downwinder syndrome, from the families who were living in southern Idaho, Nevada, and Utah during the nuclear bomb testing in the late 50s and 60s.
Yeah. That would be super interesting to talk a little bit more about.
Tell you what, we'll plan for next week, okay, Sierra? You can come on. We can talk about nuclear energy, nuclear bombs, cancer, and all that good stuff about tainted soil. Book it.
That would be fun.
Yeah. He's a wealth of knowledge on that, and he understands Superfund sites more than a lot of people, especially with regards to how irradiated soil got transferred across the U.S. from Idaho in order to fertilize, crops from one end of the country to the other. Good stuff.
Interesting.
As if we didn't think that the ways we know we're poisoned, with overprocessed food were bad enough.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out we've had a uranium enriched soil in most of the fields that have been growing our food for the last, 60 years. Just
That's never
saying,
good.
man. Just saying.
That's never good. Resistance or something, right? Jiminy Christmas.
Speaking of which, okay, legitimate concerns for misinformation while still respecting voters.
So this is a difficult question. There's so much disinformation out there and misinformation about literally anything and everything. Uh, and it's so hard to know what to trust nowadays. And one of the big things is the the fact that like you need to get our information from multiple sources. We need to be able to collaborate these, and even at that, like you could have multiple collaborating sources that are fake information or fake news, misinformation. So trying to pull from multiple different sources, like leaning political leanings as well, left leanings and right leanings, and is always kind of my big thing in regards to that. And not only that, but realizing that everybody's perspective is a little bit different. Everybody's going to have a little bit of a different reaction to saying like this is disinformation or this is misinformation. Um, and knowing how to handle that on a personal level more so, because people don't always handle the same. You can tell the same thing to 20 different people and everybody will take it differently. So it's
Right. So, Joe, somebody comes to you and says the earth is flat. Why don't you write legislation about flat earth? Why don't you write legislation that makes the schools teach flat earth theory?
what flat earth specifically is definitely one of those things where I've had that discussion with a couple earthers, and it's always such a hard discussion because you can talk about like geometry. You can say, hey, they figured out the Earth wasn't flat in the time of Greco-Roman, and or the Greek figured it out from putting a stick on the Earth and watching it, and they calibrated the entire sphere of the Earth. Um, one of my brother's topics when he talks about flat Earth is always whenever like you throw like water in the air, it naturally makes um a spherical shape. And I think that is a good counter a lot of times to the flat earth. Is in nature we see even water will turn into a spherical shape. Even though with the rain it's a spherical shape, it's not flat sheets. It's just physics. It's how the world turns, as you will.
Right. Drops of molten atoms, iron, forming in space. Is it going to form as a plane or is it going to blob?
Hmm.
The ones I like are the mobiles of the planets, and it's like all the planets around, and then you got flat Earth, and you're going, one of these things is not like the other.
Yeah.
But yeah. So aside from flat Earth being an obvious one for some of us, now I understand some people, they've never been further than, 100 miles away from where they lived. But it's like some places that you go to on this planet. When I was deployed to Afghanistan or Iraq, you got Sinjar Mountain, which is one of the holy mountains there in Iraq. And it stands 3,000 to 4,000 feet above the plains. And you're sitting up on that peak and you're high enough above the plains below, you can actually see the curve of the earth. Yeah, it's like, but that's a me thing.
Hmm.
So we do have a question here from Draper. David, he wants to know what your favorite coffee is and why is it Dutch, bro?
Well, that I mean, I do go to Dutch Bros more often than I do any other. But I'm a big fan of just black coffee, to be honest with you. Uh, just give me some black hot coffee, and I'll be I'll be okay. But I do like Dutch Bros. I do like the Italian sodas or the Red Bull drinks every once in a while too. Yeah. What
Yeah,
about you?
the Red Bull infused, that's a nice change. I will say there is a certain appreciation for the iced sweater weather
Mm.
white chocolate or white coffee. But yeah, so ooh, property taxes, my man, property taxes. Why do you think property taxes are going up?
I mean, right. So this does come back to like the asset management um, corporations as well. And then we do have an influx of people moving into Idaho from different states that are buying over market value and increasing property taxes there as well. So that's me if I'm looking at that situation. One of the parts is asset management. Anytime you're buying property over market value, you're going to artificially raise the rest of the property in the area, and that's going to
Yeah,
raise your property taxes. Um, I would, and it's really hard. It's a really hard topic in regards to like how would we be able to lock this in to where you can have the property taxes reflect the same price you bought it at versus um, rising with the inflation that is being the artificial inflation, if you will. That's I guess is where my like question would come from.
yeah. This one's an interesting one because Idaho, we actually tax on all three lanes. There's three primary sources of revenue for the state, for a state. One is income tax, second is sales tax, and the third is property tax. Now, the state is set up so a lot of it generates revenue from sales tax and from income tax. Counties and cities generate it from property tax. So that comes into who actually benefits from certain funds. Now, when it's actually broken down, the Idaho Tax Commission has a paper and it basically shows what the average tax burden is a percentage of an individual's income. Here in the state of Idaho, the average is 9%. Depending on which tax bracket you're in, that's from 10 to 8%, 8 to 10%. And as you would know, based on the way our legislature favors certain class, the families that bear the 8% burden are generally the wealthier. And because of the regressive nature of the sales tax and the property tax, poor families have a higher tax burden of the percentage they make. Now, that's just state income tax. That doesn't take into consideration the nature of federal income tax. And the way the state has it balanced is it's pretty even. Approximately a third of the state revenue is from sales tax, third from income tax, third from property tax. And that balance changes a little bit based on influx. Tax Commission does a really good write up on that every year. But it's like, why are we taxing all three when we understand what the average tax burden is on the individual as a percentage of their income? We know that in order for Idaho to be successful, for our communities to be successful, the average income, the average resident pays somewhere close to about 9% of their annual income into taxes, whether they're doing it via sales tax, via income tax, via property tax. And that really doesn't change in any significant way. That's what the tax burden is. We distribute it. We decided to nickel and dime you, when you get paid, when you go to the grocery store and buy your groceries. Which I'm sort of sad that that citizens initiative didn't go farther this year. But we take a look at the way the tax burden is developed, and it's like we could just do a 9% income tax, just flat 9% income tax, and the state of Idaho would generate enough revenue. Of course, the problem with the state of Idaho, just like the state of California and the federal government, which is where we're going to be, is that it doesn't have a revenue problem. It has a spending problem.
Right.
You know, it's addicted to giving money away. And in a lot of ways, it's addicted to giving it away badly. You know, fraud, waste, and abuse accounts for probably close to a third of federal spending if you do the breakdown. Maybe more, depending upon which conspiracy theorist you listen to. Maybe all of it's fraud, waste, and abuse at this point.
Yeah, and that goes into another point of that fraud, waste, and abuse is it's an unequal sales position essentially. You have these people that are just giving money to the congressman and everything like that, but they're not equipped to say no to these people. They're not equipped to deal in a higher pressure sales environment. And I'm not going to sit here and blame them or say like, well, yeah, I'm not going to give them an excuse, but that's part of the reason we need to limit government as much as we can, because the more you push these people that aren't supposed to be like saying no to like salesmen essentially all the time, that's essentially what they have to do. That's essentially what a congressman or a representative has to do, is say no,
Yeah.
no. I'm not going to buy your product for you to get, billions of dollars back on the back end. And I don't think a lot of people realize that's part of the issue, is that they have to deal with salesmen constantly,
Oh, yeah.
level, high pressure salesmen. And
it's a permanent installation. K Street lobbyists, day in, day out.
Yep.
So how much is it going to cost? They don't say it this way, but every time they walk into the office, it's like, what's your price in order to pass this legislation I want?
Yep.
And Open Secrets is a good one to show just how much. Certain organizations, APAC Tracker is a good one to show just how much your congressman, your senator has received from that particular special interest group.
Right.
You take a look at what goes on with other lobbying organizations, group organizations that donate towards congressmen in order to get legislation passed. You take a look at the amount of money that's currently flowing in from religious institutions, in order to pass certain agendas. How do we set the laws? How do we create an environment where, we need to write laws that legislate morality? And we need to do it yesterday. How much is it going to cost you to, sponsor this bill?
Yeah. And you just, it's such a difficult thing, because that's how those fraud, waste, and abuse is because you, like, at some point they get the number right. You know what I mean? And I was watching Thomas Massey the other day. This might be, but he talks about being a part of Congress is being Bilbo Baggins, and he talks about this congressional pin that most of the congressmen wear, and he relates that to being the ring of power. And he's like, you can't let that ring of power get to your head, because that's part of the problem, is that, there isn't a price. To me, I will forever be flabbergasted by how 174K isn't enough to live on. Like, how are you getting this much money and not able to live comfortably, and not being able to say no to everybody who else offers you for some special interest? You don't need it.
So with that lead in, let's go ahead and bump down to number 12 here. So if a voter asks, how do I know you won't go to DC and change? What's your answer?
And that's one of those things, like, relating back to that Thomas Massey again, not letting that power get to your head, and that's so often what happens is they see that like I'm in control of this much money, I can vote for this and nobody's gonna notice, and like I can just do this little thing. It's like that whispering in your head from Gollum. You just have to tell it no. You can't let that Gollum have a bigger voice than it already will have in your head, because if when you're in that position, you're going to have that voice in your head saying like, oh, just take the special interest, just take, it's so much easier. You can't relent to that voice, and it's going to be constant, ever present. And that's why they say absolute power corrupts absolutely, because the more you have power, the more it corrupts you. And you have to be constantly on guard against it.
That's one of those things, the omnibus bill. Every year, they stick this omnibus bill in front of everybody, and this is a $5 trillion spending bill. 5 to 7, I think 7 trillion is the current, and it's just, here's all the government spending for the next year. $7 trillion, one vote.
Yeah.
There's no amendments, none of that's allowed once it's submitted to the floor. And it's like, if you have access to being the writer of that, or being one of those who can slide something in, what's 0.01% of $7 trillion?
Right.
I mean, it's a drop in the bucket, and some of them just think it's less than, 1% of 1%, I deserve it. Well, no, you don't. That's fraud. That's abuse. You don't deserve it because you were paid $172,000 a year to go there and make decisions on behalf of the people.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you maintain that level of integrity, through 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, knowing that at the same time you have this opportunity to control the purse, while you have these lobbyists going, we gave you $1 million for your campaign that got you here. Do you want that $1 million again next campaign?
Right. Yeah, no, and that's, and it's that comes back to that Citizens United as well. And one of the things I'm pretty excited about and that I really want to try to push coming up in the next couple of years is the transparency election initiative from Montana. I don't know if you've heard about this, but essentially they're trying to bypass Citizens United and make it null and void essentially. So that's
Right.
something, and I'm gonna, one of the reasons I like ballot initiatives is because the citizens of the states need to be able to answer, like, tell them, hey, we want this. Paul Harvey, to quote Paul Harvey, he says something along the effects, or paraphrase, I guess, that the Magna Carta was handed to the King of England on the edge of a sword. These ballot initiatives is how we hand that power to our power and say this is what we want. And I think I'm a huge fan of citizen led ballot initiatives because of that, because that's how we say to our powers that be, we want this.
Yeah, we had, in California, one of the reasons why an awful lot of the people who've come from out California hate the Citizens Initiative process was it was getting abused badly in California. You'd show up at the polls and there'd be like 15, 20 ballot initiatives that were sitting there that you had to read through and decide how you were going to vote on, because it was just that easy to get a ballot initiative, on the ballot. Here in Idaho, we generally don't push ballot initiatives that hard. Cannabis initiative has been one that's been consistently filed every cycle, in an attempt. You got to have people, you got to have time. You either need money or you need time. And let's face it, most Idahoans don't have money.
No,
And they don't have time because they're busy working for the money that the government's going to take 30% of,
Yeah.
and they still want to be able to raise their family and feed them. So we don't see an awful lot of that unless there is, a very big interest. Now, cannabis, as a general rule, you don't see an awful lot of interest in people being able to step away because they don't want to be seen as an activist for that. They don't want to risk, the police interacting with them. They don't want to be seen as one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of how important it is medically for a number of people, here in the state of Idaho. But one of them that has done extremely well with volunteers is the Idahoans United for Women and Children, their End the Ban initiative. That's closed in. I believe it's met numbers. It will be on the ballot. And that was entirely volunteer in much the same way the Medicaid expansion was. So these are citizens' initiatives, the will of the people coming to the senators, the legislators, saying, hey, we want this, and it's going to be interesting to see this year, considering the number of people who voted for it, 6 years ago, 8 years ago. And the legislators this year, the numbers who have tried to rescind, the Medicaid expansion that we passed. So it's going to be interesting to see how many are directly affected by their votes against Medicaid expansion, which was a citizens' initiative process. The other thing is how many of them are going to campaign against End the Ban that was presented by Idahoans for Women, United for Women and Children. How do you campaign with the intent? Yeah, how do you campaign with the intent to overturn a past citizens initiative? Mm-hmm. It's like you got candidates right now that are actually running on the thing. I don't care if medical cannabis passes in the state of Idaho. I'm going to vote to overturn it, in January when, vote for me, I'll overturn what you voted for. I don't care if people passed the Women's Rights Initiative. Vote for me and I'll vote against it when it's my opportunity to overturn what you voted for.
Yeah. That sort of stuff, that's the dirty politics that I really would like to get away from, but it's out there and it's going to be out there for a long time. I don't think we should suppress the voice of the people. That's a big thing in my platform, is that we need to listen to the people. If people are saying this, screaming this from the rooftops, we need to listen to them. Otherwise, you get bad circumstances and bad situations when people feel like they can't have their voices heard. Things turn really bad, and that's very true, especially here in America. We have a gun behind every blade of grass. We do not want that situation. They need to be able to listen to the people, and they need to be able to speak up and have their voices heard. That's where I fall on that. It's just
the road to revolution is on the paths the elites take to avoid it. We're in the process of basically criminalizing the symptoms of bad governance. So rather than admit they made a mistake in governance, rather than, accepting that the status quo, the institutional processes that we've embedded relatively recently, mind you, in the last 40, 50, of the 250 years of the United States of America, the last 50, we'll go with John F. Kennedy. I know it goes back 100 years, 1918, Hyde Island, for all of you who are history buffs. I know it goes back to a certain amount of that where we've always granted favor towards industrialists, and financialists, and said, if you have a big enough idea, the government will fund it. And we've done that for over a century, and here we are 100 years later, and we're looking at what that has done to America as a culture, where it's led us. And we begin to understand that government subsidizing industry to the point where it becomes such a habit. And that's where it is. We're no longer subsidizing with intent, with purpose. We are excusing. No. We are treating action in place of strategy. It's like we're doing it just to do it. Not because there's a plan behind it or a goal or an end state.
Yeah. There's a lot to say about that too, because Sam Altman will a lot of times go on and do these interviews and podcasts and stuff like that, and talks about the federal government backstopping his AI adventures, and that yeah, like I don't have money to insure AI data center, like AI, and I don't think there's really anybody at this point that has that level. We don't even have that level of trust in AI is doing what it's going to be doing. We don't want AI data centers in our backyard. They make noise, they take up water, they take up electricity. There's not a net positive that we're seeing at our current juncture enough to justify AI data centers. And he goes on and says, like, yeah, let's just have the government backstop it. Like, we're $40 trillion in debt, bro. Like, I don't know if we can. It's just not possible. You're asking
right? How are we going to sustain it? And again, that's one of those things. I see the AI bubble coming. Just like the housing bubble, just like the .com bubble before that. It was a great idea, but it's not sustainable and it's not scalable. It is a logarithmic function. Not linear, it's logarithmic. The more you want from it, the more power it consumes.
And the less it gives, the more power it consumes. Like, yeah.
You don't get the return on investment by making it bigger. It's not scalable. And that's what an awful lot of people, but we are throwing money at it. We are throwing federal money at it. We are throwing state money at it. We are spending on AI, which is, at this point, it's just a brute force attack, trying to simulate artificial intelligence. It takes significantly more power to mimic than it used to. It's costing us more for what we get with every iteration, as opposed to actually being cheaper.
Yeah, or more beneficial. And that's one of my things with the AI as well, is like I do see some manufacturing uses for it, but minimal and limited. Not to the extent that they're trying to use it, and it's just over cumbersome and overburden. It's a burden on our society at this point in time with what they're trying to do with it. I mean, yeah, it's, man, AI, but I do see that bubble coming. That's one of those things about the Nvidia deal. I don't know if you know about this Micron Nvidia deal. But a lot of their chips come from Taiwan, TSMC. And I don't know if I was telling you this last week or the week before, but one of the news sources I was listening to and talking about, it said that one of the opposition leaders for Taiwan went and met with the leader of China. So I don't know what Jensen Hung is trying to do with that, or if he's trying to possibly move more towards Chinese endeavors at this point. there's not a lot of information about that, but I kind of see it in the wind, if you will. That would be my prediction, if you would, that he would be getting closer to China, uh, coming up, and I I personally see them rug pulling the AI chip development from Micron and saying like, we had this contract with you, but now it's gone. So because we're moving more of our efforts into China from TSMC and building out there and putting our new patents out there. How true is that? I don't know. But that's just if I were to predict, if I'm looking at the future and trying to like crystal ball it, if you will, like just look at it and see this is kind of what I see coming. Um, but am I right? I don't. Who knows? Who knows? That's
Well,
just my
it's one of
prediction.
those things. It's pattern recognition. Do we see the patterns? Can we look at it? Can we match it to history?
Right.
Can we say this is the honest to God future path of the American empire? You know, are we scheduled for a fall or are we scheduled for a renewal? You know, we easily could find the right people at the right time,
Hmm.
to have an American renaissance. It'd be nice to see 2030 be, the next American renaissance
Yeah.
as opposed to the fall of empire.
Yeah.
Um, David, David, this one's a good one. David's here. I'm ready for my AI robot maid. Stop stomping on my dreams. Um,
Hey,
yeah, get your little waifu uh, robot.
I, and I'm
Uh,
not saying like they already have the tech for building AI robots, but
oh yeah,
what the problem is what they're trying to do is they're trying to make AI omniscient, like with artificial generative intelligence, and that to me is just a pipe dream. But having an AI robot made, I mean, we already have the robot sweepers that just go around your house, zoom, 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 taking up all the dirt. So that,
we got the Roombas
yeah, the Roombas, yeah,
and
that's
all
what they're
those
called.
operators out there that want to turn them into Boombas.
Just a little C4.
A little C4, just a little Claymore.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Um, so we've been here an hour now. One of the things that you brought up here is an interesting topic. We are running on the GOP platform. And the general consensus is that the Republicans are the conservatives. You know, there are things that we value, that we appreciate, and they're considered conservative values. What does being a conservative mean to you, Joe?
This is a good question, and I really like this question. What a conservative means to me, to be honest with you, is the ideals of it: limited government, personal freedoms. Uh, we we really have to look at those, and separation of powers is always big to me. Like, I, as a conservative, I don't want the government in every aspect of my daily life. And like I've said a lot of times in the past, I think Idaho does a pretty good job of keeping its state sovereignty. There are some laws and bills that I see pushed that are trying to take that stuff away. Um, and I don't necessarily agree with those. But for the most part, it does try to keep the state sovereignty and limited government in play, uh, not encroaching on our personal freedoms. And I don't feel like I'm having to do a daily check everywhere I go. And I don't think that we should have a place in time and where we have to do daily checks everywhere we should go. Uh, and I guess I'd really have to dig into it in regards to like where personal freedoms are being attacked more, because I know about the flock cameras, and I'm not a fan of those either. And I think that's an invasion of personal freedoms, if you're to ask me, even though they're just license plate readers for whatever reason. Um, and then separation of powers. So every institution should have its own power and be able to stand up to the other institution. And like I've said a little bit in the past, of like the we we have this silent third branch, especially here in Idaho, of the or silent fourth branch of the religion is very, very big, and it's a power structure. We need to make sure that that doesn't get muddled in with the rest of the power structures. Everybody can have their freedom from religion, and stand on those values that they want, and morality, like we're talking about, should be a guiding principle in governance, but it shouldn't override any of the other principles of governance.
So James brings up a good point here. The USA, if America saw what America was doing to the American people, America would invade America to liberate the American people from America. It's a bit tongue in cheek, but there's a certain amount of truth to that in the way that we've allowed certain authoritarians to exceed the scope of government. We created the 9th and 10th Amendments for very specific reasons. The powers of the state versus the powers of the federal government, who is reserved, powers reserved to the people as opposed to being presented to the state. The power to choose what you do with your land, that's supposed to be an individual right. It's a power that belongs to the sovereign citizen, which is one of those things that Idaho was largely founded on. It's the right to our labor. It's the right to the rewards for our labor, and it's our right to choose how we labor in order to get those rewards back. And when it comes down to conservative values, that's the biggest thing, is allow me to be responsible for myself. Even if that means that sometimes I make bad decisions. They're my decisions. They're not somebody else's bad decisions making my life choices, which is what we end up with sometimes when the government decides, I'm going to make those decisions for that individual, and I will put a gun to their head in order to make sure that they abide by the decisions I made for them. That itself is the antithesis to conservative values.
Right.
We believe in giving everybody the ability to be responsible for themselves, to be able to take care of themselves as long as they do not violate the rights of others. Allow me to be responsible for myself. Allow me to make the decisions I need to make, whether that's the medicine I use, whether that's my choice of association. As long as I am not promoting violence against others, as long as, I'm taking care of my responsibilities that I feel are important to me, and I am not causing harm to others. Why would you feel the need to dictate how I live my life? We saw that 33 years ago, Ruby Ridge. The state dictated the length of a shotgun.
Right.
And as a result, they put bullets through a young boy and a man's wife.
And his dog.
And his dog.
And,
didn't
they kill his baby too?
No.
Okay. But she was holding it.
She was holding the baby when she was shot.
Okay. Man, that's when when we in Idaho think about personal freedoms, that's where I always go back to as well. Is he a shotgun that was a couple inches too short is really what led to that.
Yeah. It wasn't even a couple inches. It was less than an inch, I believe.
It's yeah. I mean,
it's just a touch under the appropriate length. And they brought out federal agents. They brought out a sheriff who was acting in a federal role at the time. All of this over the length of a gun and a badly written, court summons. Still can't drink beer in public. No, you can't. You got to be on private property, or in a fenced area. They do make some concessions for big events in the park. They got the beer gardens, but you pay a hefty fine. You pay a hefty fee, not a fine. Pay a hefty fee in order to do those kind of events. Now, as far as conservative values, the sovereign citizen is a big thing. The ability to make decisions, and part of that being a sovereign citizen is making sure that the federal and state governments do not infringe upon your rights. One of the things that I tend to take a look at a lot is the Idaho State Constitution. Article 1, Section 1, Declaration of Rights. Go ahead and read it here real quick. The inalienable rights of man. All men are by nature free and equal and have certain inalienable rights, among which are enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, pursuing happiness, and securing safety. These are the core values of our nation. They were part of the Declaration of Independence. They were echoed in the Bill of Rights. They are an essential. They are the first section of the first article of the Constitution of the state of Idaho. Before all other things, we secure the inalienable rights of man. Those gifts given to us by our Creator. And by Section 2, it starts devolving. They start stripping away, the rights of man. Well, the legislature has this power over the rights of man, and the legislature has that power over the rights of man. But it's like everything that follows that is an infringement upon the rights of man. The ultimate constitutionally protected right, Article 1, Section 1. Let us do as we please, as long as it harms none. Yeah. But conservative values, we don't take excessive amounts. That's my commie coming through, my Republican commie, saying we still need funds. We still need to pay for certain forms of governance in order to protect the rights of the people. We haven't found a way to fund that without taxing people yet. I'm hoping someday we can. But in the moment, we're sort of in this situation. Certain functions that we require of government as a people requires that we fund the government that protects our rights.
Yeah. I think they used to get paid on tariffs back in the day. The Congress
They
used
did.
to. Yeah.
Well, that was one of the things back prior to 1918, World War I, when they created the temporary federal income tax in order to pay for the war. There were other means of making sure government offices got paid. One, of course, was creating a fee system for certain state functions. The other was tariffs of goods coming and leaving the states or the country. Certain other forms, and of course, property taxes, been around a day.
30.
Yeah. Of course, sales tax. Well, tariffs is a sales tax.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
It's value added to the goods, and it's taxed as it's moved from one stage to the next. But at this point, we recognize just how small the government needs to be if we're going to use that method to fund it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this comes back to the government doesn't have a revenue problem, it has a spending problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. James, love that one. Harming none, arming all. Give me a moment here. Let me post that one here for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, harm none and the right to self-defense and the defense of others, under threat to liberty, it's a key constitutional value. It's a key conservative value. Anyway, you got anything for us, Joe, as we finish up here? We've been at this 75 minutes.
I'm good. I just, Joe Morrison running for United States Congress against Russ Fulcher, Congressional District 1 in Idaho. You can find my information at morrison4id.com. That's Morrison, the number 4id.com. There are other ways to follow me from there. Facebook is linked in there and YouTube is linked in there. And usual, Joe, it's been a lot of fun talking, visiting about the issues, and hopefully we can get the Sierra on next week and talk about some more issues.
That sounds like a plan. See you next week, Sierra. Of course, I'm Joe Evans. I'm running for U.S. Senate against Jim Risch. He is the incumbent. He is the institution. However you feel about that. You can find more information about me, my policies, my platform, joeevans4idaho.com. And of course, see me here next Thursday with Joe and anybody else who decides to show up.
I have one other thing we have the Ada County Republican Central Committee on April 21st, 6 p.m.
Next Tuesday
to 7:30 p.m. At Boise High. If you're interested, we'll be showing up. I'll be showing up roughly like 5:30, I think is what they said for show up time for.
Show up time for the candidates, 5:30. That gives us a little bit of time to circulate, set up tables, put our merchandise, our business cards, our pins, our yard signs, all of that fun stuff out for everybody to see and take home afterwards after they've listened to us talk extensively about the policies. Like Joe said, that is next Tuesday. The actual debate, town hall, will be going on from about 6 to 7:30, hour and a half, 2 hours. And it's the statewide candidates. Okay, so this is going to be office of the governor. It's like, surprisingly, nobody else is being challenged in the primary. So you got the governor, the U.S. congressional candidates, and the U.S. Senate candidates. So we got 7 Republicans for governor, running for the governor, 4 for U.S. Senate, and 3 for each of the congressional seats. And because they split Ada County right down the middle, Ada County Republicans get to host both District 1 and 2. So it'll be a good time, get to meet everybody and figure out where you're voting. Take care.
You too.